Welcome back to the Uncensored Voice. This is Randolph Macias, your host. And today I want to bring attention to something that we all hold very dear to our heart. On September 11th, it will be the 20th anniversary of the World Trade Center attacks. Just some stats for you over the years that have been refined from then until now. We have 2,996 deaths. There were 2,977 victims, and included in that 2,996, 19 of those were the Al-Qaeda perpetrators. And 25,000 were injured on top of all that. So there were many thousands of casualties, many thousands of injuries, and nothing changed the American fabric way of life more than this event did, and also in recent events with COVID-19. Now, the American Airlines Flight number 11 was the first to hit on the North Tower. The second was United Airlines Flight number 175 and the South Tower, the second tower. And then in the Pentagon, it was American Airlines Flight number 77 and United Airlines Flight 93. Now, if you remember the story behind that, there were cell phone calls going out about passengers on that flight that were getting ready to, I guess, more or less bum rush the cockpit to make sure that maybe they could save the plane, or if they knew that their lives were doomed at that point, they said their goodbyes. And it was very sad, very sad. Some family members heard their family's voices for the last time, and they knew that they were going to die. But one of the most famous lines, the famous words that I've heard, is the implementation of taking out these terrorists that were on that plane by phrase, two words actually, let's roll. And roll they did, and they saved many more American lives, forfeiting their own. And my tribute is to them, those brave Americans that died that day. That was in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, near the Stony Creek Township, and homage is paid there every single year on September 11th. When I woke up that morning, back then TVs had to warm up to turn on, so I turned it on. I heard the volume first, and I thought, oh, I don't want to watch the news. Let me switch a channel. So I switched a channel, heard the same thing. I switched a channel, I heard the same thing. And this is through all major news stations in San Antonio. So KENS 5, KSAT 12, and News 4, San Antonio, which back then I think was known as KMOL. Everything was the same, and all of them were on the major news network, like CBS, ABC, and NBC. I thought, oh my gosh, what the hell's going on here? So later on, I figured out that there were two towers. One was smoking, and then there was commentary. And then I saw a plane turn sideways and then hit, excuse me, one of the towers. And I thought, am I watching a movie? What's going on here? There didn't seem to be too much emotion from the commentators on what actually happened, but what I actually saw in retrospect was the second plane hitting the second tower. That was real, and it actually flew into the building. Concrete building, very strong building. People's lives instantly were forfeited in 2 seconds, 1 second. It was a very sad sight to see. I look back on that now, and I think all Americans that knew where they were at during that time, because when events like this happen, they tend to be remembered as to where, people can recall, in other words, where they were and what they were doing that day. It's the same as when John F. Kennedy was shot and assassinated. People always remember exactly what they were doing that day and where they were at any given time. I was waking up, getting ready to go to work that day, and I was just tired and I just wanted to watch some TV, whatever was on. But yeah, so that's what I woke up to. And I'll tell you, it was very surreal, very, like I was in disbelief. I couldn't believe it actually happened. And things developed later on in the day, and then we discovered that was a real plane that really hit. That was not a movie. That was not a scene from a movie where the news is showing some plane flying into a building. These are real Americans that died in the name of so-called Muslim, Islamic, terrorist, religious jihad, whatever you want to call it. So that's what I was doing, and that's where I was out. I was at home, and I turned on the TV, and I saw the second plane hit live. So in the comment section, if you wouldn't mind, if you have time, let's all reflect as to where we were and what we were doing that day. I'd really like to see what pre-9/11 life was like for my fellow Americans. It gives us an idea, because things since then have changed forever, and things will never be the same. I was hired at a place called On Point. It was a place that I had been recently hired to and had just finished training, and the job was booking American Airlines reservations on the Sabre system. Now, the following day, on September 12th, or maybe on the 13th of 2001, they called us all in. They fired us. They said, "We don't know what to tell you. There's no work. All planes have been grounded. All flights. There is no activity anymore. The World Trade Center is gone." We reflected on that, and it was a very sad sight to witness when, well, not a sad sight, they described it to us, but we all saw it on TV. We all knew where we were. So we lost our jobs that day, very next day, or at least the second day. I think that same day they decided that they were going to fire us. So we were all dismissed, and I just wanted to make sure that if you are willing to, I'd be very grateful if you could leave in the comments what you were doing that day. So it gives us some perspective as to what pre-9/11 lives were like, because we have had another significant change in event that has altered our lives forever, and that is COVID-19. Now this, in the new administration, we are told to follow the science. Now, we all know that the United States is a country based on Judeo-Christian principles. Our very fiber is in God. And the rights that are given to us by our Creator. And according to the Judeo-Christian principles that our founding documents were founded, that were drafted, our Creator is God. And so our life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness, our God-given rights, government does not give them to us. So let's talk about the Taliban connections to 9/11. In December of 2001, federal judge from Manhattan, George Daniels, signed a judgment finding that Iran, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda were liable for the 9/11 attacks. But how did the 19 terrorists manage to enter the United States? Many of these terrorists from Afghanistan went to Iran, and the Iranian government ordered their border agents not to stamp their passports. A lot of them found refuge in Afghanistan, and there they were. But the beginning of the Afghanistan war was the United States, U.S. government had asked for the Taliban, I believe, who was in power during that time in Afghanistan, to shut down all Al-Qaeda camps and to hand over Osama bin Laden, and their refusal to do that caused them to be dispersed throughout Afghanistan, and they were easily toppled by our coalition forces. But they also found shelter in Iran, and they just scattered and dispersed like cowards. bottom line is that there is a $100 billion judgment against the Taliban currently, still in 2021, against the Taliban and others, which we just so happen to arm with our own weapons, worth about $50 billion or more. So instead of them giving us $100 billion, we give them $50 billion of military equipment. And they want to be recognized in their so-called government that they're establishing, called the Emirates of Afghanistan. They were found parading caskets with American and British flags in recent videos and blaming the United States for those 9/11 attacks because of, and I'm loosely quoting, but they said Muslim oppression, the indifference to the Muslim Islamic way. They blamed us for our own 9/11 attacks. So the attacks were justified because we hurt their feelings. That's not good enough. So the Taliban gave safe haven to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan during that time. And because of this, 1 month after the U.S. led that broad coalition to overthrow the Taliban, and like I said before, it was easily done on the orders of President George W. Bush. But the Taliban is now back in full control in Afghanistan thanks to Joe Biden. The worst military withdrawal ever, some akin to a surrender. On October the 7th, 2001, the Afghanistan war began targeting Taliban camps and others, and the Taliban, well, they were easily thrown over, and that ended with the fall of Kandahar on December 7th, 2001. So, as a result, certain laws in the United States were passed, among them the U.S. Patriot Act. Some of these sections of the law are in effect and some are not, but one of the most important and significant ones were it would allow private conversations to be monitored via from cell phones and other means. Bank accounts were monitored, emails were monitored, all without our consent, in the light of what happened, because they were looking for the terrorists at that time, and so the law was in effect. The creation of the Transportation Safety Administration, who we all know we've had a run-in once or twice about how far our liberties should go as far as privacy. I've had my own personal experiences as well. I've heard many stories. It is what it is. We still have them today, and hopefully throughout the years, the way they make sure the safety of Americans are intact has been more defined and more, hopefully, appropriate in certain circumstances, as before they were not. What needs to stop is letting our laws be enforced at the discretion of people in power, in this case the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer. I can go on and on and on. But it needs to stop letting our laws be defined by those people, the enforcement of those laws. Joe Biden just threw our border laws right out the window. Immigration law, doesn't even care. But without impartial application of our laws, there can be no free democracy. Because if there is no free democracy, that will spawn socialism. And unfortunately, and as I have mentioned many times, we live in a dark America right now. 13 service members passed away in August. They didn't have to die. Some didn't even live to see their 21st birthday. We have a Laredo native that is going to be buried in, it's a public service on September 10th. And one of our fellow Texans are going to be laid to rest, a United States Marine, God rest his soul. So the casualties in Afghanistan were topped off with these 13 deaths, unfortunately. Well, some people are not challenging, at least publicly, some of the civil liberties that we gave up. As our founding father, Ben Franklin, once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And, well, especially in 2021. Now, the Patriot Act expirations I wanted to go over, so these are not in effect anymore, and most recently have been addressed by Mr. McConnell, I think in April of 2020, about 1 month after the COVID-19 lockdown. The lone wolf provision is no longer in effect. That means where the government is allowed to track an individual, not just devices, wherever there may be, whether it be what's called roving wiretap monitoring, rather than devices that are authorized by the FISA court. Section 215, the national security, the NSA rather, is now prohibited from collecting millions of phone records of millions of Americans, which had been done very shortly after the 9/11 attacks, who have not been suspected of committing a crime. This same section was used for financial data and wire transfers. Now, a few patriots, in the circles that I've been, finding out about, during the so-called insurrection in January 6th of earlier this year, Bank of America was requested by the FBI to give up records of their customers to verify their presence in Washington, D.C. during the so-called insurrection. What was actually a peaceful protest, and we know that Antifa and we know that Black Lives Matter took great prominence in that, but none of it was mentioned in the media. They just blamed Trump supporters. But banks turned in their customers at the request of the FBI. Now, if parts of the Patriot Act were reinitiated briefly to authorize this, I'm not for sure, or if this was just a cordial handover of financial data and information from a private bank to the federal government. I'm not for sure. I'll have to do further investigation on that, but many people are closing their accounts at Bank of America. And so that's what happened. Their banks essentially turned them in. So how many freedoms that we gave up and may not even know about are currently in force or not? Let me give you a little bit of a COVID-19 comparison. With the technological advancement on private platforms protected by Section 230, these precious freedoms are being attacked again, and this time much more aggressively, my fellow Americans. Much more aggressively. Every tiny little detail is fact-checked. It's partially false. It's never partially true. It's only partially false or missing context or just simply not true. And then we get reduced exposure, and some of us get our Facebook accounts shut down. Mine, after 10 years, I've known others who had accounts for much longer periods of time just shut down, and there's nothing they can do about it. President Trump was this close to getting Section 230 closed, or at least the loophole closed, and then the administration actually used Facebook. In a statement by Jen Psaki, they said that the administration is going to be looking at problematic postings on Facebook. So this tells me that they are working in concert. Not only are they not going to stop Section 230, they are also going to work with them and work together to silence us, the American people, our free speech, in the name of, well, what they call it, community standards. Well, the administration, Joe Biden administration, is going to be working with Facebook now. So now they're friends. We know that they donated money to the campaign, but to work on a scale to curtail American freedoms and our basic freedoms of speech in the name of a private platform and community standards is just ridiculous. Some things, even if they're not true, people need to talk. Sometimes people need to vent. Certain things are inappropriate, of course. But to make speculations based on things that haven't even been proven yet, that are proven by Facebook fact checkers somewhere in California, is unacceptable. One of our own local news media outlets here in San Antonio, KSAT 12, is in the fact checking business. Some of you may or may not have recalled that there's a helicopter, one of our helicopters, I forget what the nomenclature of this helicopter was, but you saw a human form dangling from a helicopter, appears to be hung by the neck, floating around. The video is floating around on Facebook. KSAT 12 put an article out that said that was not somebody getting hung by the Taliban in a helicopter, floating around, driving, whatever they were doing, moving around, hanging people. What it was is they said that their sources on the ground, which, would be the Taliban, all right, or some secret source that is unnamed, said that this individual had a harness and they were adjusting a flagpole. I don't buy it. So we now know that KSAT 12 News, San Antonio, Texas, is in the fact-checking business as well. I don't know where they're getting their information from or what type of fake news they're using to try and give Facebook fact checkers some competition or something on a local level. But I'm sure that there are people in our local government, the woke ones, which I think they all are, with the exception of one city council that I'm aware of, is in on stuff like this. Nobody talks about it because they all agree not to. They just want to keep it a secret. But there is a source behind KSAT 12 News fact checkers. Just want to make sure I called them out. But this time it involves our personal liberties that we're giving up. It involves restriction of movement in the name of COVID-19 as far as masks and vaccines. We have one vaccine out there with Pfizer, another, I think a couple others, Moderna and another, I think. But anyway, the Pfizer vaccine begins with some impressive effectiveness. It just boosts the antibodies like crazy. And then it was discovered that we needed a second booster. And then a third one, I believe, is on the rollout. And we already know that Israel, the most vaccinated country in the world, is now already distributing their fourth booster, which I suspect would be making the body dependent on antibodies. I don't know. You tell me. I'm doing a little research on it, and I'll find out some more information on that. But I think that these so-called vaccine boosters, and also that of which we don't know exactly what's in them, are making the body dependent on antibodies. And whether or not you've had COVID-19 symptoms and then actually came down with the illness, either person that was vaccinated or unvaccinated is still going to get the disease at one time or another. No one is going to be completely immune forever from this. Kind of like the flu vaccine, we get it once a year. But this is a rollout of booster shots in very short succession. So what they did is they skipped the animal trials and they went straight into getting these vaccines distributed, and now unfortunately it's a work in progress. And in my opinion, the human being is the guinea pig. That's the only way I think that I can describe that. So going back to September 11th, we must not let, from then until now, we must not let government get big. Voter integrity is paramount. There's so much evidence out there of voter fraud, so many stories that don't get told. We need to have accountability. Texas just passed a law for our voter integrity. 5 lawsuits have already been filed. One of them, I believe, is the ACLU. But Governor Abbott is certain, according to reports of a quote I heard earlier, this morning. I think it was what he said. I think that it'll be able to weather the storm. So hopefully everything will be fine, and it does not go into effect until maybe 2 or 3 months from now. And right now, this is the first week of September. So we'll see if it gets challenged and if there's an injunction. We already know that they're going to try and file for them. 5 lawsuits have already been filed. So guys, it ain't over yet. It's not over yet until, we solidify making it easier to vote for those who are able to vote, and making it impossible for those who should not be voting or are illegally voting. And for those who are illegally voting and get caught, which I hope we catch all of them, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This includes more poll watcher ability. There's many, many amendments that we're going to be voting on very shortly coming up. So, as far as the Americans being left in Afghanistan, I want to make it a point to the Biden administration that the evacuation is not complete. As I speak, there are Americans sitting on the tarmac, sitting in airplanes, waiting to be flown off to maybe a America-friendly base, and hopefully from that point they can get home. But according to the Taliban, which is our only source of information, they don't have the proper paperwork. There have been reports of Taliban confiscating American passports, beating Americans, abusing Americans. Some can't even get into the airport. So those that were finally allowed to get into the airport and into the airplanes, the charter flights are not being allowed to depart. And the State Department is involved in them not being able to take off at this time. And the Biden administration is getting a lot of heat from that. Lincoln is an idiot. And it's amazing how they try to spin this. Telling Americans, essentially blaming them. Telling them, well, we told them many, many times for 20 years to get out. But it's not up to the State Department or even the U.S. government as to where an American wants to reside. If they want to reside in Afghanistan, they're going to reside in Afghanistan, whether they check in with the consulate or not, which would be a good idea in a country like this. They're there now. And some in the military did not want to leave their fellow Americans behind. You don't do a withdrawal like that. That is akin to surrender. Now we have a hostage situation. They don't want to call it a hostage situation. Jen Psaki sure as hell didn't call it a hostage situation. They're never going to say the words. But you tell me what an American sitting on a tarmac in Afghanistan on a charter plane being prohibited from taking off from the country against their will. Sounds like a hostage situation to me, and it sounds like the Taliban have some leverage with American citizens and American lives, and I pray to God that none of these Americans die or who have not made it into the airport. And I hope that those that have everything set up to leave get the hell out of there and get home safely. I think it was Glenn Beck had chartered some planes, or there was one plane I heard of that he chartered. His plane is not allowed to leave Afghanistan with as many people as he can put in there, I'm sure. So I blame the State Department, I blame the Biden administration for these Americans being stranded, and in all actuality, they caused them to be stranded. But let's make no mistake. As far as 9/11 goes, I say that the Taliban worked in concert with Al-Qaeda, whose leader was Osama bin Laden, which was killed 10 years later. It took us 10 years, but we found that guy, and we killed him, shot him straight in the forehead. He is gone forever. But this spawned the Bush Doctrine, which was first mentioned by Joseph Krauthammer in the early 2000s. And just to give you some context on this, on 9/11, the Taliban denounced the attacks of 9/11 on September 11th. And so, as a result of that, and I'm going back to what I said earlier, the United States asked the Taliban to shut down all Al-Qaeda bases and hand over bin Laden. They said no, so we invaded and then we won. And then they've been in the countryside ever since, and Joe just let them come right back in. And now it remains to be seen if there's going to be a civil war in Afghanistan with them trying to establish governments. They're already naming formal posts in their so-called Emirates of Afghanistan, while Americans are still there because they have leverage now, because the Taliban warned the Biden administration not to go beyond the August 31st deadline. And, well, the Biden administration bowed to that. Rumor has also that the Chinese have taken inventory of American military equipment. Thanks, Joe. Thanks a lot. And some of these weapons could be used to kill or harm Americans. So, they're selling whatever they don't want, but they're probably going to keep most of it because some of this stuff is so technologically advanced that they don't know how to use it. So they're going to sell it and make money off it. And the $100 billion judgment we had against Al-Qaeda and the Taliban and, well, Osama, which is now dead, we actually gave them $50 billion more of the money that they owed us. They owe us $100 billion. That's likely never going to happen, but the principle of the thing is that we gave them $50 billion of equipment. And who knows, are we going to pay ransom for American lives, American citizens in Afghanistan? Is that what's going to happen? It remains to be seen. But the Bush Doctrine was referred to by Joseph Carl Tamer. There was a famous quote that ties the Taliban directly to Al-Qaeda and directly to Osama bin Laden, who we captured and killed. Quote, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them." So there are already 2 Taliban government officials, self-named, that are on our terrorist watch list. The United States must not recognize the Taliban regime, because if they do, they are making a very horrible mistake. Very horrible. So, I appreciate you listening. Appreciate you watching. May God bless America and the great state of Texas.